To most Star Wars fans, the moment Luke Skywalker climbed into the cockpit of an X-Wing to fly against the Death Star in A New Hope seemed almost too convenient. How did a young farm boy with no military background or space combat experience suddenly find himself in one of the most critical battles in galactic history? It looked like Luke was simply handed a fighter and thrown into the fire, but in canon, there's far more to the story. According to the book The Princess, the Scoundrel, and the Farm Boy, a canon retelling of A New Hope, the Rebel Alliance didn't simply toss Luke into battle on blind faith. In fact, they put him through a test, a rigorous simulator designed to measure his reflexes, accuracy, and combat instincts. And what happened during that simulation shocked everyone. This is the full story of why the Rebel Alliance trusted Luke Skywalker to fly in the Battle of Yavin. When Luke arrived at the Rebel base on Yavin 4, he was still reeling from everything that had happened. The deaths of his aunt and uncle, the destruction of Alderaan, and his crash course exposure to the Galactic Civil War. Everything was happening fast. The rebellion was preparing for a desperate strike against the Death Star, and every capable pilot was needed. But even in that urgency, the rebels didn't skip protocol. When Luke expressed interest in joining the fight, he was escorted to a hangar where X-Wings were being maintained. A gruff technician, clearly busy and unimpressed, questioned Luke about his piloting experience. Luke mentioned his time flying a T-16 back home, but the technician remained skeptical. It was clear that Rebel pilots didn't just get handed ships without some sort of vetting process. Instead of being thrown into battle immediately, Luke was directed to a tucked-away simulator, a full X-Wing cockpit replica rigged to a massive monitor. It was designed to mimic the chaos of a real dogfight. A chart hung on the wall nearby with the names and scores of various pilots who had taken the test. To Luke's surprise, a young man named Wedge Antilles appeared to oversee his trial. Luke was initially intimidated. Wedge looked even younger than he did, but his calm, confident demeanor suggested experience beyond his years. Wedge introduced himself and gave Luke a quick orientation. The simulator didn't have a pass-fail grade. Instead, it measured combat reflexes, accuracy, and how long a pilot could survive against a relentless barrage of enemies. Luke was nervous, but determined. He wanted to prove he belonged here. Luke's first run in the simulator was nothing short of a disaster. As soon as the screen blinked to life and launched into the battle scenario, he was overwhelmed. The simulated TIE fighters came at him fast, too fast. He couldn't track them, he couldn't aim properly, and worst of all, he didn't realize just how realistic the simulator would be. Every element was designed to mimic the shock and stress of real combat. The simulated G-forces threw him back into the seat, rattling his brain with the force of imaginary impacts. His hands slipped on the controls. His timing was off. The ship jolted violently as he tried to steer, and his shots flew wide. Within moments, he was hit again and again, until a blinding flash signaled the end of the scenario. 2 words blinked on the screen: simulation over. Luke leaned back, stunned and humiliated. He had felt so sure of himself walking in. He had flown his T-16 for years. He thought he understood speed, precision, and control, but this was something else. The T-16 was a toy compared to the complexity of an X-Wing. He took off the helmet and sat in silence, trying to process what had just happened. But Wedge didn't mock him. He didn't scold him either. Instead, Wedge reminded Luke that failure was normal. In fact, most pilots failed their first simulation, even Wedge had. With a reassuring tone, Wedge told Luke that he once performed even worse his first time through, but he learned from it. And if Luke wanted to try again, he would be there to help. The simulator was designed to push pilots to their limits, not to break them, but to teach them. It wasn't just about reflexes and firepower. It was about learning how to stay calm, how to adapt under pressure, and how to make instinctual decisions when every second mattered. Luke realized this wasn't a test to see if he was already good enough. It was a tool to help him become better. And that realization changed everything. He asked Wedge for another shot. Wedge took the time to explain the simulator in detail. He showed Luke how the controls mapped to the real X-Wing systems, how to use the astromech droid to focus on shooting while flying, and how to manage minor differences in thruster control. Luke listened carefully, absorbing everything. He admitted he'd been too eager, rushing in without understanding the mechanics. But now, things were clicking. He realized the X-Wing wasn't so different from his T-16 after all. He just needed to adjust to the increased complexity and firepower. Wedge also gave him the most important advice of all: trust your instincts. Luke recalled Obi-Wan saying the same thing during their training aboard the Millennium Falcon. The message was finally sinking in. When Luke sat down for his second run in the simulator, everything felt different. Gone was the frantic, wide-eyed eagerness from before. Now there was focus, intent. His hands, which had trembled during the first attempt, now gripped the controls with confidence. As the simulation booted up and the screen flared to life, Luke no longer tried to simply react. He allowed himself to feel, channeling the calm, centered mindset that Obi-Wan had begun teaching him aboard the Millennium Falcon. This time, instead of panicking as TIE fighters zoomed toward him, he stayed cool. The simulated enemy ships still came fast, swarming the screen in chaotic waves, but Luke tracked them. He maneuvered with sharp reflexes, finding the rhythm of the dogfight and adapting to the ship's responses. The X-Wing's controls no longer felt foreign, they were an extension of his will. Halfway through the run, he switched over to manual control, just like he had done flying through Beggar's Canyon. He began to feel the ship's movements, not overthink them. He dodged incoming fire by instinct, fired back with pinpoint accuracy, and worked in sync with the simulator's astromech systems. Wedge, watching from the console, looked up in disbelief. Luke was flying like a veteran. The simulator kept throwing more enemies at him, testing his endurance and his ability to maintain control under pressure. But Luke never faltered. As the scenario ramped up, he kept moving, shooting, evading, and then, at last, the screen flashed with a final message: simulation over. But this time, it didn't feel like failure. In fact, when the room settled, Wedge stepped forward, blinking at the monitor. Luke had scored higher than anyone before him, higher even than Wedge himself. Applause broke out from the other pilots gathered around. Luke had just gone from untested farm boy to the top of the board, not because of luck, because of skill, because he learned, and because he never gave up. He was no longer just the farm boy tagging along, he was a pilot. Luke later joined the rest of Red and Gold Squadron in the War Room. There, General Dodonna laid out the plan to destroy the Death Star by firing torpedoes into a small thermal exhaust port. The task required exceptional precision. Many pilots expressed doubt. Even Wedge questioned whether the shot was possible. But Luke stepped forward. He explained that back home, he'd bullseyed womp rats that weren't much bigger than the target. His confidence helped sway the room. Garvin Dries, leader of Red Squadron, even laughed and welcomed Luke to the team. The commanders weren't taking a gamble. They were betting on someone who had earned their trust through performance, not reputation. So why did the Rebel Alliance let Luke Skywalker fly in the Battle of Yavin? Because he proved himself. Luke didn't just walk in off the street and get handed a fighter. He trained, he failed, he learned, and then he triumphed. His natural talent, combined with guidance from Wedge and his experience on the T-16, allowed him to beat the simulator and convince the rebellion he was ready. The Battle of Yavin wasn't Luke's first test. That came in a corner of the hangar where a young man sat in a simulator and turned doubt into destiny. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and as always, may the Force be with you.